Thanks so much to all my patrons. Join now to help support the channel and help pick the books I review on this channel. Link in the description.
And I am done. Okay, so I just got done listening to The Well of Ascension. This is book 2 of Mistborn Era 1 by Brandon Sanderson, and I want to give you my unedited thoughts on finishing this book, which was literally just right now. So I really like this book. I'm going to give it, I think, a 4.5 out of 5. You know, it was somewhere between liked and loved, which is kind of how exactly I rate a 4.5, which is exactly how I felt about this one. And oh my, I got to jump right to it because it just happened. But the ending of this book is so good. Sanderson really, Sanderson knows how to end books. You know, he's got some superpowers to him. I've found over time that, you know, I don't think of Sanderson as on this, like, huge pedestal that I used to think him as when I hadn't read a lot of fantasy authors. But I will admit freely that there's a few things that he is just a god at. And figuring out how to wrap up a book, which is a very hard thing to do, especially on the middle book of a trilogy, which is almost impossible to do, he finds a way to pull it off. And it's just incredible. So, yeah, I want to back up a little bit, give a little history to my read here before we talk into the book itself, because I read this book before. This is I read this trilogy, and I'm almost kind of flipping totally my thoughts on all of these books around, because the first time I gave the first book 5 out of 5 stars, loved it, one of the better books that I'd ever read. Now, I hadn't read a ton of books, so, you know, undoubtedly that was going to be the case. Even though I didn't like it, it was going to be one of the better books I ever read because I hadn't read a ton. But I read it again, and I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. And I couldn't even give it like I liked it score. You know, a 3 for me is like, eh. So somewhere between that and liked it. Because I had a lot of problems with the first book. Namely, I felt like a lot of the book was setup. It was the setup of trying to learn about the different characters in this crew, most of who I don't really care a lot about. But more than that, it was set up in learning the powers in the world. And, you know, when I first read the book, the powers were cool, they were inventive, but as I've read more, there's nothing super special about the magic system here. It's magic, it's cool, but it's nothing to blow you away. To have so much of that book devoted to this character learning about each of their magic powers and hundreds of pages on figuring it out when you already know it, and it's not that incredible, it felt like a lot of wasted space in the book, like a lot of wasted space. And so the only part that I really loved about the book was the last, 50 or so pages, which were so great that, I gave it a high score. But yeah, the first time I read it, loved it. Second time, not so much. But the first time I read this book that I just read, The Well of Ascension, I gave it 4 stars. And I felt like it was noticeably worse than the first one. And in much worse than the third one. I even though I gave the first one a 5 and the third one a 5, I liked the third one quite a bit more than I liked the first one. But this second book, without a doubt, now for me, is significantly better than the first book. Most of the problems that I had with the first book were solved. There was a persistent problem in this one, which is that I do not think Sanderson knows how to write a good romance story to save his life, which for me is also a very hard thing to do. But it's certainly possible. I'm not opposed to romance in my stories. I've read a lot of authors that have that component to that really pull it off. But Sanderson, I've never read a story from Sanderson that really pulled it off very well. Trust of the Emerald Sea had it, but it's not about that. It's more like a kid story with that in the background to it. But yeah, and there was a lot of emphasis on that here. And this whole, which man am I going to choose? And it had this very teenage, lame love story to it. Love kind of triangle, really I don't want to cuss on this channel. Really bad love triangle to it that I did not enjoy. But the problems I had with the pacing of the first book, this slow reveal, learning about characters, that was all gone. And what we got instead was a lot of plot progression. We got introduction to some new characters that I thought were wonderful. We got a lot more mystery and intrigue. And we got a lot of political maneuvering, which I thought were great. And so, yeah, we took out almost all the bad stuff when we entered in a bunch of stuff that I really, really, really enjoyed. So that's great. And I'm going to the third book now, where originally I was dreading going into this book and dreading continuing on with the series and going like, maybe I'm not a fan of Mistborn after all, because I didn't like the second era at all, and maybe I was going to walk away saying like, I don't like Mistborn, and the only Sanderson I really love is Stormlight. But I'm back on board with Mistborn Era 1, and I'm very optimistic that I'm going to love the third book in this series, because I already know and remember a lot of what happens in it. It's a lot of stuff that I love, and that I kept kind of hoping that some of that was going to insert itself into this one, and it wasn't. And so I'm waiting for that to kind of happen, and I can't wait for it. Now, there was a pleasant surprise for me, in that there's a major reveal that I thought happens in the third book that actually happens in the epilogue of this book, that I just got done listening to, and it is sublime. I mean, if you've read this book, I think you know what I'm talking about. But it's the reveal of, all I'll say, I guess, is the truth of what is written into metal. And it's one of the better reveals, if not like the best reveal that I've ever read from like a twist from a fantasy author. It's so dang well done, because what I always find is a hallmark of a wonderful kind of twist is when it's not something that you that was a total shock to the reader and that you never could have guessed it. I love a good twist, because when you look at a good twist, you go, oh, the signs were all there. I could have been piecing them together. And so you feel, it's almost like the author makes you feel dumb. And that's what happened here. And so to do it on a reread is so much more enjoyable, because you know that it's happening, as the author is openly deceiving you in a way that is not cheap, and you pick up on it the second time. It's extremely, extremely enjoyable. So yeah, kudos to Brandon. Great job. And also kudos, and I mentioned it here, but ending the second book on a wonderful spot, is such a hard thing to do. And the way Sanderson pulled it off in this Mistborn trilogy is he kind of makes you feel like you're done with the series after the end of the first book. The bad guy's defeated. We won. It's over. And then you get a little tease that actually it's not really over. I don't really know what's going on. And then you read the second book and you realize there's this much bigger thing going on. In this one, you feel like that's happening again. You feel like we're about to solve the problem. All of the problems in the book are coalescing. We're achieving our goals. And then we get to the end of it and it feels like a conclusion. And then you're like, oh, dang. It is not solved. In fact, it is so much worse than what it was before. And that's a great style of writing to make the book, even though it's not the last in a series, feel like it has this very solid beginning, middle, and end, and it just completely avoids that middle book syndrome. So yeah, Sanderson deserves an extreme amount of credit for the way that he plotted things out so intentionally, and it just worked. I felt like there was the introduction of a couple characters here that were very enjoyable. I felt like Tindwyl, which is another of the the 𝗟𝗶𝗸, along with 𝐂𝐮, and the relationship that her and 𝐂𝐮 have together, and them trying to constantly solve this mystery behind the scenes was a great dynamic. I felt like that was a better relationship dynamic than Vin and Elend. Even though it's dry, these characters are intentionally dry. And it comes off I love the voice acting for those characters in the audiobook. The audiobook is very well done. I didn't mention it in my review of the first book, but I kind of had a little bit of a criticism in the first book, and that I almost felt like the audiobook should have been done by a female narrator, because most of the book is, you're perceiving it from Vin, who's a woman. And it would have been nicer to have that woman voice throughout it. But an emphasis on some of the other characters, and an emphasis on this `𝗟𝗏, and the way that the audiobook narrator gives this different voice to them, and a very analytical voice. It's very well done. I felt like there was a lot of mystery involved in who has infiltrated this gang, and who is the spy. Was excellently done. Another one where, you know, when you've read it before, you remember who the spy is, but you know, it's one of those moments where, yeah, you probably should have figured it out when you're reading it the first time. Yeah, there is a character going along that that Vin totally bypasses, and I'm not going to ruin it, but that you should have been picking up on, and you didn't. I know you didn't. Don't lie. Don't lie. and when it's revealed, it's great. You know, there's another character, I don't even want to say who it is, that gets introduced in this, who, you know, come in the Discord and pop in if you want to find out who it is, that has this mysterious background to them that you don't know, and they're actually, you know, working for a different side. And I thought that was excellently done. And another one where, you know, there weren't as many clues out there, but it made sense. It worked well. You know, and so, yeah, there's so many things to this that I loved. You know, there were some things that held me back from being super in love with the whole thing, you know, that relationship thing. And also this emphasis on this character, Zane. I thought Zane sucked. You know, not because he's bad. You know, I like bad characters. Some of my favorite characters in all of fantasy are bad characters. But I didn't feel like he was written particularly well. And he's complicated, whatever, but it's just like a lot of angsty. There's so many decisions that are made that feel very silly. And the relationship thing with Vin, I thought was poorly written. And every time he showed up on the page, I disliked what I was reading. And I wanted that to be done. Luckily, it's a very small minority of the book, but still, not great stuff. And yeah, you know, the magic here I thought was handled in a better way because we're not having to learn the whole time. Now the characters have these powers, but it's not like this reliance on the powers throughout the story. They're used, but it's not like a superhero book where it's constantly like flexing. You know, there's a lot more. The evil in this book is impossible to counter with just using these powers, and it's just like this one person with all these powers. And so I felt like it was this nice balance between a very powerful character and insurmountable odds that they can't use that power to defeat. The political intrigue here was great. I mean, this idea that you have two enemy bands that are trying to infiltrate the city at the same time, that there's this standoff where if one of them enters, they would weaken each other so much that the other would win, so they're not motivated to attack first. And this whole who is going to be king and take over and all the political dynamic here I thought was that was well done. There were moments where I forgot what happens in the story, which I love. And that there's these political moments where I'm like, that's not how the political thing would shake up. And then Sanderson's like, no, there's another aspect to this. And it's actually that person was plotting when you kind of wanted them to, Matt. And it worked great. So yeah, overall, extremely enjoyable. And better than the first one in every conceivable way. I think on a first read, that might not be a popular opinion, but I feel like on a second read, I feel like that would be a very popular opinion. And let me know in the comments. Like, have you read this multiple times? Did you change your opinion? I bet a lot of people would. And yeah, I can't wait. I can't wait to read this third book now. I'm super hyped to get around to it. And I'm back on board the Mistborn train. So yeah, good stuff. Can't wait to read more. Can't wait to talk to you about it. And yeah, am I missing anything I need to talk about? No, I think that's about it. So yeah, that's it for me. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, happy reading to you. Thanks again to all my patrons, with a special shout out to my Ascendant tier and Librarian tier patrons: Amy, Anna G, CJ, Doust, Darren, JD, Jonathan, Nathan T, Nev's Book Channel, 𝗒𝘗𝑒𝐿, Ron Reich, Russell, Ryan L, Slay, Sydney Baker, Tahir, Zion, Anna, Andra, Blair, Brock, Evan, Harry W, Joe UK, Kat Mick, Michael Sugarman, Sky, and Tyler. Thanks for sticking to the end of this video, and if you want to watch some more content from my channel, click over here and I've got some good videos for you. Thanks so much.